The oak tree had witnessed 14 springs without a soul beneath its sprawling branches, until the day Kyle Ingram found a woman in a faded blue dress reading there, completely at ease as if she owned the place. The sight of her stopped him mid-stride as he rode back from checking his cattle, the leather reins going slack in his hands while his horse, Copper, snorted and pawed at the dry Texas earth. The year was 1878, and in all his 32 years, Kyle had never seen anyone trespass on his property with such serene confidence. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against the sun-bleached grass, and approached with careful steps. The woman did not look up from her book, even as his shadow fell across the pages. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though several rebellious strands had escaped to frame a face that looked both delicate and determined. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, and the book in her hands was worn from frequent reading. "This is private property," Kyle said, his voice rougher than he intended after days of speaking to no one but his horses. The woman marked her place with a slender finger and looked up at him with eyes the color of creek water after a storm, green with hints of gray. "I know," she said simply. "I have been coming here for 3 weeks now." Her directness caught him off guard. Most people would have stammered apologies or made excuses. 3 weeks, he repeated, pushing his hat back slightly. "And you did not think to ask permission? Would you have given it?" She asked the question without defiance, merely curiosity. Kyle opened his mouth to say yes automatically, then paused. Would he have? He had spent the last 5 years keeping people at a distance, preferring the company of his cattle and horses to the complications of human interaction. After his parents died in a cholera outbreak and his younger sister married and moved to Kansas, the sprawling ranch outside Kennewick, Texas had become his entire world, and he had built walls as high as the barn rafters. "I might have," he finally said. A small smile touched her lips. "Then I am sorry for the presumption. But this tree called to me the first day I arrived in town, and I could not resist. Reading beneath its shade has been the brightest part of each afternoon." Kyle studied her more carefully. Her dress was clean but mended in places, and her shoes showed the wear of many miles. She spoke with the educated diction of someone who valued learning, but her hands showed the calluses of hard work. "You are new to Kennewick." "Fairly new. My name is Faye Ellsworth. I arrived about a month ago and secured a position teaching at the schoolhouse. The boarding house where I stay is cramped and noisy, and I needed somewhere quiet to think." She closed her book fully and stood, smoothing her skirts. "Your oak tree provided sanctuary." "I should have asked first, and I apologize for the intrusion." Something in her words resonated deep within Kyle's chest. Sanctuary. He understood that need better than most. His ranch had been his sanctuary for 5 years, a place to hide from the world's demands and expectations. Yet lately, the silence that had once brought peace had begun to feel oppressive, like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. "You can keep coming," he heard himself say, surprising them both. Faye's eyebrows rose. "Truly, the tree gets plenty of shade, no sense in it going to waste." He shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. "Name is Kyle Ingram. I run cattle on this property, about 300 head right now. You might see me around, but I will not bother you." "It would not be a bother," Faye said softly, "though I appreciate the solitude you are offering." Kyle nodded, retrieved Copper's reins, and walked away before he could say anything else. As he rode toward the barn, he could feel her gaze on his back, and he resisted the urge to turn around. When he finally did glance over his shoulder from the safety of distance, she had returned to her book, sunlight filtering through the oak leaves to dapple her dress in shifting patterns of light and shadow. That evening, as Kyle prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, he found his thoughts returning to the woman under his tree. Faye Ellsworth, a schoolteacher. He imagined her in front of a classroom, patient and steady, guiding young minds. The image brought an unexpected warmth to the cold kitchen where he ate alone every night. The next afternoon, Kyle found himself riding past the oak tree earlier than necessary. And sure enough, Faye sat in the same spot, reading intently. She looked up and waved, and he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before continuing on. This became their pattern over the following days. She would arrive in the late afternoon after school dismissed, and he would pass by at some point during his work, exchanging wordless greetings. On the 5th day of this arrangement, Kyle made a decision that both excited and terrified him. He filled a canteen with cool water from the well and tucked 2 tin cups into his saddlebag. When he approached the oak tree, Faye was already there, but her book lay closed beside her, and she was staring at the horizon with an expression of profound sadness. "Miss Ellsworth," he dismounted and approached slowly. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, and he saw unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "Forgive me, Mr. Ingram. I received difficult news today." Kyle hesitated, then sat down several feet away, leaving respectful distance between them. He pulled out the canteen and cups, poured water into both, and offered her one. "Want to talk about it?" Faye accepted the cup with trembling hands. "My sister wrote to inform me that our aunt has passed away. Aunt Margaret raised us after our parents died when I was 12, and my sister Lily was 9. She was a formidable woman, strict but loving, and she ensured we both received good educations despite our circumstances." She sipped the water, composing herself. "I knew she was ill, which is partly why I came to Texas. Lily is married and settled in Virginia, able to care for our aunt in her final months. I took this teaching position to send money home for her medical care." "I am sorry for your loss," Kyle said, and meant it. He knew the hollow ache of losing family, the way grief could sneak up and knock the wind from your lungs when you least expected it. "Thank you." Faye set down the cup and looked at him directly. "Why did you offer me water today? You could have simply ridden past as usual." "You looked like you needed it." The simple truth felt inadequate, but Kyle had never been good with flowery words. "And maybe I was tired of just riding past." A genuine smile broke through Faye's sadness. "I have been hoping you would stop. These weeks beneath your tree have been wonderful, but I confess I was growing curious about the man generous enough to share his sanctuary." They talked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kyle learned that Faye had taught in 3 different schools before Kennewick, always moving when circumstances required it, never quite finding a place that felt like home. She loved literature and poetry, could recite entire passages from memory, and believed education was the key to a better future for everyone, regardless of their station in life. In turn, Kyle found himself sharing things he had not spoken aloud in years. He told her about his parents, about the ranch his father had built from nothing, about his sister who wrote occasionally but whose life had taken her far from Texas. He described the satisfaction of working with cattle, the peace of riding across open land, and the crushing loneliness that sometimes woke him in the middle of the night. "I thought I wanted to be alone," he admitted as the first stars appeared. "After everything happened, people felt exhausting. They wanted things from me, expected me to move on faster than I was ready for. The ranch became my escape." "And now?" Faye asked gently. Kyle met her eyes, seeing understanding there rather than judgment. "Now I think maybe I have been alone long enough." Over the following weeks, their afternoon meetings became the cornerstone of both their lives. Faye would bring books to share, reading passages aloud in her clear, expressive voice while Kyle sat and listened, mending tack or simply resting after a long day's work. Sometimes they would talk for hours, conversations ranging from philosophy to practical matters of running a ranch and managing a classroom. Kyle began looking forward to these meetings with an anticipation that both pleased and worried him. He found himself making small improvements to the area around the oak tree. He built a simple bench from sturdy oak planks, positioning it to catch the best afternoon shade. He cleared away the thorny brush that had encroached on the space, making the approach easier. And one day, he brought a thick wool blanket that Faye could sit on when she wanted to read on the ground. "You are spoiling me," Faye said with delight when she discovered the bench. "This is wonderful, Kyle." He had asked her to use his given name the previous week, and hearing it from her lips still sent a pleasant jolt through him. "Figured you deserved something more comfortable than hard ground. Will you sit with me?" She patted the space beside her on the bench. Kyle had been careful to maintain a respectful distance, worried about propriety and his own growing feelings. But at her invitation, he sat down, close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender soap she used. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I need to tell you something," Faye said quietly. "The school board has offered me a permanent position. They want me to stay in Kennewick indefinitely." Kyle's heart jumped. "What did you tell them?" "I asked for a few days to consider." She turned to face him. "Every previous teaching post has been temporary, and I've grown accustomed to moving on. Staying in one place feels like a risk." "What kind of risk?" Faye was quiet for a moment, her fingers plucking at her skirt. "The risk of caring too much and then losing it all. I have learned to keep my heart portable, if you understand my meaning. Getting attached to places and people only makes leaving harder. What if you did not have to leave?" Kyle kept his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "What if you stayed and let yourself care?" "Is that what you want, Kyle? For me to stay?" He could have deflected, could have hidden behind casual words and maintained his emotional distance. Instead, he reached over and gently took her hand. Her fingers were small and warm in his, and she did not pull away. "Yes," he said firmly. "I want you to stay. These past weeks, Faye, you have brought something back to this ranch that I did not even know was missing. When I see you under this tree, my property feels complete." "Hell, I feel more complete." Faye's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I feel it too. Every afternoon as I walk here from town, my heart lifts. This tree, this land, it all feels like coming home." Kyle lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and sincere. "Then stay. Accept the position. Keep coming to the oak tree." "There will be talk," Faye warned. "An unmarried woman spending time alone with a bachelor rancher. Let them talk." Kyle had spent 5 years not caring what the town thought. He was not about to start now. "Though if it bothers you, we could give them something real to discuss." Faye's breath caught. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that I am a man of 32 years with a successful ranch and a lonely house. You are a woman who needs a real home and deserves more than a cramped room in a boarding house. I am suggesting that what we have been building here under this tree could become something more, something lasting. Kyle Ingram, are you proposing to me after less than 2 months of acquaintance?" He heard the teasing note in her voice and smiled. "Not yet. I am old-fashioned enough to want to court you properly first. But I am telling you my intentions, Faye. I want to see where this could lead, and I believe you want the same." "I do," she whispered. "I have tried to be practical, to guard my heart, but you slipped past every defense I built." They sat together as twilight deepened, hands clasped, speaking in low voices about possibilities and hopes. When Kyle finally rode home that night, the ranch house did not feel quite as empty as usual. The following Sunday, Kyle did something he had not done in over a year. He dressed in his good suit, hitched up his wagon, and drove into Kennewick to attend church. The small wooden building was packed with families, and heads turned when he entered. He ignored the whispers and surprised looks, scanning the pews until he found Faye sitting near the back. She had saved a space beside her. After the service, Kyle formally asked permission to call on her, speaking loudly enough for nearby congregants to hear. Faye accepted with equal formality, and just like that, their courtship became official and public. The minister's wife, a kind woman named Dorothy Perkins, approached them with a knowing smile. "It is good to see you back among us, Mr. Ingram," she said warmly. "And Miss Ellsworth, I hope you have decided to stay in our community. The children adore you." "I have accepted the permanent position," Faye confirmed. "Kennewick is my home now." Dorothy beamed. "Wonderful news. You must both come to dinner next Friday evening. Nothing fancy, just pot roast and good conversation." Kyle accepted the invitation, and as they walked outside into the bright October sunshine, Faye slipped her arm through his. "You did not have to make such a public display." "Yes, I did." Kyle covered her hand with his. "You deserve courtship done right, with no questions about my intentions or your reputation." Their courtship unfolded with a sweetness that surprised them both. Kyle began joining Faye in town twice a week, taking her to dinner at the modest restaurant, walking with her along the main street, making sure everyone saw them together. On other evenings, she would ride out to the ranch in the small buggy she had purchased, and Kyle would cook dinner for them both. Simple meals that they ate at his kitchen table while talking about their days. Faye proved to be genuinely interested in the ranch operations. She asked intelligent questions about cattle breeding, water management, and market prices. Kyle, in turn, visited her classroom one afternoon and watched with admiration as she guided 15 children of varying ages through their lessons with patience and creativity. "You are remarkable with them," he told her afterward as they walked back toward the oak tree. "They are good students, eager to learn, though I worry about some of them." She told him about 2 children whose family was struggling after their father's injury, about a bright girl whose parents did not see the value in educating daughters beyond basic reading, about a boy who came to school hungry more often than not. "What if we helped?" Kyle said suddenly. "I have more than I need, Faye. The ranch does well. If there are families struggling, we could find ways to assist them." Faye looked at him with such tenderness that his breath caught. He confirmed. "I am hoping that before too long what is mine will be yours as well." November arrived with cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets. Kyle began planning for a Christmas proposal, wanting to give Faye the romance she deserved. But fate had other plans. One Wednesday afternoon, Kyle was working on repairing fence posts in the north pasture when Copper suddenly whinnied in alarm. He looked up to see a rider approaching at dangerous speed. As the figure drew closer, he recognized Tom, the teenage son of his nearest neighbor, the Garrison family. "Mr. Ingram," Tom shouted as he reined in his lathered horse. "We need help. Pa got thrown from his horse and landed bad. Ma sent me to fetch Doc Morris, but we need men to help carry him back to the house. He is out in the south section." "Go get the doctor," Kyle said immediately. "I will ride out and help your father." "How far out?" "Near Dead Man's Creek, by the old cottonwood stand." Kyle grabbed his medical kit from the barn, a well-stocked box his mother had insisted every rancher maintain, and rode hard for the location Tom had described. He found James Garrison lying in the shade, his wife Ellen kneeling beside him, and their two younger children standing nearby with frightened faces. "Kyle, thank God," Ellen said. "He has not regained consciousness. His left leg is clearly broken, and I am worried about his head. He hit it hard when he landed." Kyle examined James carefully. The leg was indeed broken, but his breathing was steady and his pulse strong. The head wound looked worse than it was, bleeding profusely but not too deep. Together, Kyle and Ellen fashioned a makeshift stretcher from blankets and branches, and with painstaking care, they transported James back to the Garrison homestead. Doc Morris arrived an hour later, examined James thoroughly, and set the broken leg. "He has a concussion but should recover fully with rest. The leg will take months to heal properly. He cannot do heavy work during that time." After the doctor left, Kyle found Ellen in her kitchen, preparing supper for her children with shaking hands. "What will we do?" she said quietly. "We cannot run this place without James. We will lose everything." "No, you will not," Kyle said firmly. "I will send 2 of my men to help with your essential work, and I will come by regularly to handle anything they cannot manage. You will get through this, Ellen." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why would you do this for us? We are barely more than acquaintances." "Because that is what neighbors do," Kyle said simply. "And because I recently learned that having people to care about makes life worth living." When Kyle finally returned to his ranch well after dark, he found Faye waiting on his porch, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She rushed to him as he dismounted. "Tom stopped by to tell me what happened. Is Mr. Garrison all right?" Kyle explained the situation as he led Copper into the barn, Faye following close behind. "He will recover, but it will be a long road. They are good people facing bad circumstances through no fault of their own." "You offered to help them," Faye said. "It was not a question." "Of course I did." Kyle finished settling Copper in his stall and turned to face her. "Faye, I have been thinking. I have this large ranch, more land and resources than one man needs. You have a heart for helping people, especially those struggling to get by. What if we did this together? Used what we have to make a real difference in this community." Faye stepped close to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gray in her green eyes. "Kyle Ingram, I was planning to wait for you to propose in your own time, but I cannot stay silent any longer. I love you. I fell in love with you somewhere between that first day under the oak tree and now, and every day it grows stronger. Whatever life you want to build, I want to build it with you." Kyle cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I love you too, Faye. I have loved you since the day I found you reading under my tree like you belonged there. Because you did belong there. You belong here with me in my life, in my home, in my heart." He kissed her then, a soft, reverent kiss that tasted of promises and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling. "Marry me," Kyle said urgently. "I was going to wait and plan something special, but I cannot hold the words back any longer. Marry me, Faye. Be my wife, my partner, the mistress of this ranch. Help me turn this lonely property into a real home." "Yes," Faye breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They stood in the barn, surrounded by the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, and made plans. A winter wedding, simple but meaningful. Faye would continue teaching, at least for the remainder of the school year. They would work together to help the Garrisons and any other families facing hardship. And they would build a life based on love, generosity, and the quiet joy they had found beneath an oak tree. News of their engagement spread through Kennewick like wildfire. The community, which had watched Kyle retreat into isolation after his parents' deaths, welcomed the announcement with enthusiasm. The minister's wife organized a celebration at the church, and half the town turned out to congratulate the couple. "About time you rejoined the living," said Frank Morris, the doctor who had treated James Garrison. He was a gruff man in his 60s, but his eyes were kind. "Your father would be pleased to see you settling down with a good woman." "I think he would have liked her," Kyle agreed, watching Faye across the room as she laughed at something Dorothy Perkins was saying. "Liked her. Son, he would have adored her. A woman who reads under trees and teaches children and is not afraid of a rancher who has spent 5 years acting like a hermit. That is a rare find." The wedding took place on a cold December morning at the church, with most of Kennewick in attendance. Faye wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Dorothy and several other women had helped her make, and she carried a small bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. Kyle wore his father's good suit, altered to fit his broader shoulders, and he could not take his eyes off his bride as she walked down the aisle. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle kissed Faye with such tender joy that several women in the congregation wiped their eyes. The reception was held at the town's community hall, with tables laden with food that neighbors had contributed. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts, and through it all, Kyle and Faye moved together as if connected by an invisible thread, always aware of each other, always touching in small ways. As evening fell and guests began to depart, James Garrison, leaning heavily on a crutch, approached the newlyweds. His leg was still healing, but he had insisted on attending the wedding despite his wife's protests. "Thank you," he said simply to Kyle, "for everything you have done for my family these past weeks. Your men have kept our place running and you refuse to accept any payment." "Family does not pay family," Kyle said. "And in a place like Kennewick, we are all family whether we share blood or not." James turned to Faye. "You have a good man here, Mrs. Ingram, one who remembers what truly matters." As they rode back to the ranch in Kyle's wagon, Faye leaned against her husband's shoulder, warmth and contentment flooding through her despite the winter chill. "Mrs. Ingram," she said softly, "I like how that sounds." "So do I." Kyle kissed the top of her head. "Welcome home, wife." The ranch house, which Kyle had cleaned and prepared for weeks, glowed with lamplight as they approached. He had filled the rooms with what luxuries he could manage on short notice. Fresh flowers in vases, new curtains for the windows, a beautiful quilt for their bed that his sister had sent from Kansas. When he carried Faye over the threshold, she laughed with pure happiness. "You have been busy," she said, looking around the transformed space. "I wanted it to be perfect for you," Kyle set her down gently. "I know it is not as fancy as houses in bigger cities, but—" Faye silenced him with a kiss. "It is exactly right. This house, this ranch, it is everything I never knew I was searching for." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two lonely souls finally finding completion in each other's arms. They talked and loved and held each other as snow began to fall outside, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. The next morning, Kyle woke before dawn as usual, but for the first time in 5 years, he did not feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. Faye lay sleeping beside him, her dark blonde hair spread across the pillow, and the sight filled him with such profound gratitude that he had to blink back tears. He rose quietly and started the stove, making coffee and beginning breakfast preparations. Faye appeared in the kitchen doorway as the sun was rising, wrapped in a thick robe, her feet bare and her face soft with sleep. "Good morning, husband," she said, coming to wrap her arms around him from behind. "Good morning, wife." Kyle turned in her embrace and kissed her properly. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in years." She moved to help with breakfast, and they worked together in easy coordination, talking about the day ahead. It was the first of countless such mornings, the beginning of a rhythm and partnership that would define their marriage. Faye continued teaching through the spring, and true to their intentions, she and Kyle began quietly helping families in need. When they learned that the bright girl Faye had mentioned was being denied further education, Kyle visited the family and offered to pay for her books and supplies, framing it as an investment in Kennewick's future. When the family whose father had been injured faced eviction, Kyle negotiated with their landlord and helped them catch up on back rent. "You cannot save everyone," Faye said gently one evening as they sat beneath the oak tree, now a beloved spot they visited regularly. "Maybe not," Kyle agreed. "But we can help where we are able. Is that not what this land is for? What prosperity is for? Not hoarding it, but using it to make life better for those around us." Faye leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are a remarkable man, Kyle Ingram. I am so grateful I trespassed on your property that day." "Best trespass that ever happened." He wrapped his arm around her. "This tree brought you to me. I will never look at it the same way again." As spring turned to summer, Faye discovered she was pregnant. She shared the news with Kyle one evening under their tree, and he responded by picking her up and spinning her around, both of them laughing with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you pleased?" Faye asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased? Faye, I am more than pleased. I am blessed beyond measure." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child born of our love to grow up on this ranch in this community. Yes, I am very pleased." Faye finished the school year. Then Dorothy Perkins, who had some teaching experience, agreed to take over her classes when the fall term began. Faye spent the summer helping Kyle on the ranch, learning every aspect of its operation and making plans for the nursery. The baby, a boy they named Thomas after Kyle's father, arrived on a cold February morning in 1880. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when both Doc Morris and Kyle feared for Faye's life, but she proved as strong as she was determined. When the doctor finally placed the squalling infant in Kyle's arms, tears streamed down the new father's face. "He is perfect," Kyle whispered, staring in awe at his son. "Faye, he is absolutely perfect." "Let me see him," Faye said weakly from the bed, and Kyle carefully placed Thomas in her arms. Mother and son looked at each other for the first time, and the love that shone in Faye's eyes was so powerful it seemed to illuminate the room. The Garrison family visited a few days later, bringing food and gifts. James was walking without a crutch now, his leg fully healed, and their ranch was thriving again thanks to the help Kyle had provided during the crisis. "We wanted to thank you properly," Ellen said, holding a beautifully carved wooden cradle. "James made this for your son." "It is not much, but it comes from grateful hearts." "It is everything," Faye said, touched by the gesture. "Thank you both. This means more than you know." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Kyle and Faye's ranch became a gathering place for the community. They hosted barn dances and harvest celebrations, opened their doors to travelers needing a meal and a bed, and continued their quiet charity work. The oak tree remained special to them, and on warm evenings, they would bring Thomas there, telling him stories as the sun set. "This is where I first saw your mother," Kyle would say, bouncing the boy on his knee. "She was sitting right here, reading a book, and in that moment my whole life changed. I trespassed," Faye would add with a smile. "A terrible thing to do, but it led to the best decision of my life." When Thomas was 3, Faye became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and on a warm September afternoon, she delivered a healthy daughter they named Margaret, after Faye's beloved aunt. Kyle had hoped for a girl, and his joy at holding his daughter for the first time was boundless. "Now we have one of each," he said, cradling Margaret while Thomas peered at his sister with intense curiosity. "Our family is complete," but Faye surprised him 2 years later with news of a third pregnancy. "I know we said 2 was enough," she said nervously, "but apparently fate had other plans." Kyle laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Then fate is generous indeed. Every child is a blessing, Faye. Every single one." Their third child, a boy they named Daniel, arrived without complications in 1886, completing their family of 5. The ranch house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of children playing, and Kyle could hardly remember the isolated man he had been before Faye appeared under his oak tree. The children grew up surrounded by love and purpose. Kyle and Faye taught them not just ranching skills and book learning, but compassion and generosity. Thomas, as the eldest, took his responsibilities seriously, often accompanying his father on trips to help neighbors. Margaret inherited her mother's love of reading and her father's practical nature, a combination that promised great things. And Daniel, the baby, proved to be a joyful child who made everyone around him smile. The years passed in a blend of hard work, deep love, and community service. Kyle expanded the ranch, buying adjacent property and hiring more hands, but he never lost sight of what truly mattered. Every evening, no matter how busy the day, he made time for his family. And several times a week, he and Faye would steal away to their oak tree, sitting together in the spot where their story began. "You ever regret it?" Kyle asked one evening as they watched the sunset, their children playing near the barn within sight. "Marrying a rancher and settling in a small Texas town. You could have done so much more with your education." Faye looked at him with surprise. "Regret? Kyle, I have lived exactly the life I was meant to live. I teach our children and any neighbor child who needs help. I read voraciously and share that love with others. And I spend every day with a man who makes me feel cherished and valued. What more could I possibly want?" "I just want you to be happy," Kyle said softly. "I am blissfully, completely happy." She took his hand. "That day I decided to read under your tree was the luckiest day of my life. I found not just a place to sit, but a home, a love, and a purpose. You gave me all of that, Kyle. You gave me just as much." Kyle squeezed her hand. "More, really. You saved me from a life of isolation and bitterness. You taught me that opening my heart again was worth the risk." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they sat in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The children grew into fine young adults. Thomas became a skilled rancher, working alongside his father and eventually taking over much of the daily operations. At 21, he married a schoolteacher from the neighboring county, a bright woman named Sarah, and they built a house on the western section of the property. Margaret, at 19, shocked everyone by announcing her intention to study law, a bold choice for a woman in 1894. Kyle and Faye supported her dream wholeheartedly, helping her secure a position as a clerk in a law office in Austin where she could apprentice while continuing her studies. "She is going to change the world," Faye said proudly as they waved goodbye to Margaret from the train station. "Just like her mother," Kyle replied, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders. Daniel, still only 14, showed promise as both a rancher and a scholar, inheriting the best traits of both parents. He was especially close to his father, often accompanying Kyle on his rounds to check on neighbors and assist families in need. "Why do we help people so much?" Daniel asked one day as they rode back from delivering supplies to an elderly widow. "Not that I mind, but some folks in town think we are strange for giving away what we worked hard to earn." Kyle considered his answer carefully. Because we have been blessed, and with blessing comes responsibility. Your mother taught me that. When she appeared under our oak tree all those years ago, I was a lonely man hoarding his solitude like treasure. She showed me that life is meant to be shared, that prosperity has no meaning unless it improves the world around you. You think I will find someone like that? Daniel asked, the question revealing his 14-year-old heart. Someone who changes everything, if you are lucky, Kyle said with a smile, and if you keep your heart open to possibility. I never expected to fall in love with a trespasser reading under my tree, but that is exactly what happened. Kyle and Faye celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in December of 1898. The entire community turned out for the celebration, held at the church where they had married. As they renewed their vows in front of family and friends, not a dry eye remained in the building. 20 years ago, I found this woman reading under an oak tree on my property, Kyle said during his toast at the reception. I could have asked her to leave. Instead, I asked her to stay, and it was the best decision of my life. Faye, you made my property feel complete, but more than that, you made my heart complete. Here is to 20 more years and 20 after that, and all the years God grants us together. Faye raised her glass, her eyes shining with tears and joy. To my husband, who saw a trespasser and offered sanctuary, who took a lonely ranch and turned it into a home filled with love. Kyle, you are my great adventure, and I would not trade one moment of our life together. The party lasted well into the night, with dancing and laughter and storytelling. James Garrison, now in his 60s but still healthy and active, stood to speak. Most of you know that Kyle and Faye helped my family through our darkest time, but what you might not know is that their generosity did not stop there. Over the years, they have quietly assisted dozens of families in this county, asking for nothing in return. They have given employment to men who could not find work, paid medical bills for families facing ruin, ensured children had school supplies and winter coats. They live their faith every single day, and Kennewick is immeasurably better for their presence. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Kyle and Faye remained humble, uncomfortable with the praise even as they appreciated the sentiment. As the new century dawned in 1900, Kyle and Faye were both in their early 50s, their children grown or nearly so, their ranch prosperous, and their reputation for generosity well established throughout the region. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns, cattle diseases and personal sorrows, but through it all, their love remained constant and strong. One warm spring evening, they walked to their oak tree as they had done countless times over the past 22 years. The tree had grown larger, its branches spreading wider, providing even more shade. Kyle had reinforced the bench he had built so long ago, and it remained their special spot. You remember what you were reading that first day? Kyle asked as they sat down, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. Faye laughed. I do, actually. It was a collection of Wordsworth poems. I was reading Tintern Abbey, the part about how nature never betrayed the heart that loved her. Fitting, Kyle said. You were surrounded by nature and your heart was never betrayed. Neither was yours. Faye rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and earth and home. Kyle, do you know what I think about sometimes? What love? I think about all the small moments that had to align perfectly for us to find each other. If I had chosen a different teaching position, or if you had ridden a different direction that day, or if I had been too timid to trespass on your property. Any one of those things and we never would have met. But we did meet, Kyle said firmly. Against all odds, you appeared under my tree and changed my life forever. That has to mean something, Faye. That has to be more than coincidence. I think so too. She lifted her head to look at him, seeing the lines time had etched around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the face she loved more than any other. I think some souls are meant to find each other, and ours were destined to meet beneath this tree. Kyle kissed her softly, a kiss that still held the spark of their early passion but had deepened into something richer and more profound over their years together. I love you, Faye Ellsworth Ingram. Every single day I love you more. And I love you, Kyle. Thank you for not asking me to leave that day. Thank you for seeing possibility instead of trespass. They sat together as twilight fell, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. From the house, they could hear Daniel practicing his guitar, the music carrying sweetly across the evening air. This was their life, the one they had built together from a chance meeting and mutual loneliness transformed into partnership and joy. Thomas and Sarah provided them with their first grandchildren, twin girls born in 1901. Kyle and Faye doted on the babies, frequently riding over to Thomas's house to help with childcare and marvel at the new generation. Margaret returned from Austin for visits when she could, regaling them with stories of her legal work and the cases she was helping to prepare. And Daniel, now 19, had begun courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible young woman named Lucy, whom both Kyle and Faye approved of wholeheartedly. "We are becoming quite the dynasty," Faye said one evening as she and Kyle sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Children, grandchildren, a ranch that spans thousands of acres. Your father would be proud of what you have built." "What we have built," Kyle corrected. "None of this would exist without you, Faye. You are the heart of this family, the center around which we all revolve." Their later years were marked by contentment and purpose. They continued their charitable work, though now their children often took the lead, having learned their parents' values well. Kyle gradually handed over ranch management to Thomas while remaining involved in major decisions. Faye spent her days reading, tending her garden, helping care for her grandchildren, and writing long letters to Margaret. On a beautiful October afternoon in 1907, Kyle and Faye celebrated their 51st birthdays together, born just 1 month apart. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a joint celebration, including Thomas's family, Margaret home from Austin, and Daniel with his wife Lucy and their infant son. 51 years, Kyle said during dinner, his arm around Faye's shoulders. And the best 29 of them spent with this remarkable woman. 29 years since I found you under the oak tree, Faye said softly. The best decision I ever made was to trespass on your property that day. And the best decision I ever made was to let you stay, Kyle replied. He looked around the table at his children, their spouses, his grandchildren, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had built. After dinner, Kyle and Faye slipped away to walk to their oak tree alone. The evening was cool and clear, with a full moon rising over the eastern horizon. They sat on their bench, the same one Kyle had built nearly 3 decades earlier, now weathered but still sturdy. "I have been thinking," Faye said quietly, "about the future, about what comes next." Kyle squeezed her hand. "What about it?" "I want you to know that whatever happens, however many years we have left, I am at peace. My life has been so full, Kyle, so rich with love and purpose. I have no regrets, no lingering wishes. You gave me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." "You gave me the same," Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. "A lonely, bitter man found redemption under this tree. You saved me, Faye." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That is what love does. It takes 2 incomplete people and makes them whole together." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the moon rise higher. Around them, the ranch teemed with life, the cattle settling for the night, the horses nickering softly in the barn, the house glowing with lamplight and the sounds of family. Everything they had built together, everything they had become, had started right here under this oak tree 29 years ago. Kyle and Faye lived many more good years, watching their family grow and flourish. Daniel and Lucy gave them 2 more grandchildren. Margaret married a fellow attorney and settled in Austin, where she became one of the first female lawyers to argue before the Texas Supreme Court. Thomas continued running the ranch with skill and integrity, upholding the values his parents had instilled. Through it all, Kyle and Faye remained devoted to each other and to the community they had served for decades. They became beloved elder statesmen of Kennewick, sought out for advice and wisdom, respected for their lifetime of generosity and kindness. On a warm June evening in 1918, 40 years after Kyle first found Faye under his oak tree, they took their regular walk to that special spot. Kyle was 72 now, his hair completely silver, his steps slower but still steady. Faye, at 70, remained beautiful in his eyes, her dark blonde hair now mostly gray, her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived. 40 years, Kyle said as they sat on the bench. It seems impossible that so much time has passed. And yet not nearly enough, Faye replied. I could live 100 years with you and still want more. Me too. Kyle pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder as she had done countless times before. I love you, Faye. Every day, every moment I love you. And I love you, Kyle, forever and always. They sat together in the fading light, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life of extraordinary beauty. The oak tree that had witnessed their meeting stood strong and steady above them, its branches spreading wide, providing shelter and shade just as it had for 4 decades. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kyle thought about the journey they had traveled together. From loneliness to love, from isolation to community, from a property that felt empty to a home that overflowed with life and joy. All because of a woman who had chosen to read under his tree and a man who had chosen to let her stay. Thank you, he whispered into Faye's hair. For trespassing that day, for choosing me, for making my life complete. Faye lifted her head and kissed him softly. Thank you for building me a bench, for courting me properly, for giving me the greatest love story I could have imagined. You made me believe in home, Kyle. You showed me what it means to truly belong. They remained under their oak tree until the moon rose high, reluctant to leave the spot that held so much meaning. But eventually, they stood and walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, the same way they had walked through life, together and complete. Kyle and Faye were blessed with many more good years. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. The ranch had passed primarily to Thomas, but the family still gathered regularly at the main house where Kyle and Faye lived, coming together to share meals and stories and laughter. The oak tree remained their sanctuary, the place where their story began, and the place they returned to again and again to remember, to celebrate, to simply be together. They had weathered everything life threw at them, strong in their love and faith, and their legacy of generosity and kindness lived on in their descendants and throughout Kennewick. On a peaceful spring morning in 1931, Kyle passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 85, with Faye holding his hand. His last words to her were simple and perfect. Best trespass that ever happened. Faye mourned her husband deeply, but she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had served, and in the memories of 53 years of extraordinary love. She continued to visit the oak tree regularly, sitting on the bench Kyle had built, feeling his presence in the rustling leaves and dappled sunlight. 18 months later, on an October afternoon golden with autumn light, Faye settled beneath the oak tree with a book of poetry, the same collection of Wordsworth she had been reading the day Kyle found her. Thomas checked on her an hour later and found her at peace, the book open in her lap, a slight smile on her face as if she had just heard something wonderful. They buried her next to Kyle in the Kennewick Cemetery, and at the service, all 4 of their children spoke. But it was Thomas who captured the essence of his parents' love story best. My father was a lonely man living half a life until the day he found my mother reading under his oak tree. He could have asked her to leave. Instead, he asked her to stay, and in doing so, he gave himself permission to live fully again. Together, they built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love and generosity that will endure for generations. They proved that loneliness is not a permanent condition, that one chance meeting can change everything, and that love, real and lasting love, makes us better than we could ever be alone. The oak tree still stands on the ranch, now known as the Ingram Oak, a landmark visible for miles across the flat Texas landscape. Thomas ensured it was protected in perpetuity, and Kyle and Faye's descendants continue to gather beneath it to remember the love story that started there in 1878. The bench Kyle built, carefully preserved and restored over the years, remains beneath the tree. Often, on warm afternoons, you can find members of the Ingram family sitting there, sometimes reading, sometimes just enjoying the shade and peace. They come to remember 2 remarkable people who found each other by chance and chose each other by design, whose love transformed a lonely ranch into a home filled with joy, whose generous spirits lifted an entire community, and whose story reminds us all that the best things in life often begin with an unexpected meeting under an old oak tree. The ranch itself continues to thrive, passed down through the generations, still operating according to the principles Kyle and Faye established: hard work, integrity, and service to others. The Ingram name is synonymous with generosity in Kennewick and throughout the region, a lasting tribute to 2 people who understood that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we give away and who we love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun is setting and shadows stretch long across the Texas prairie, locals swear they can see 2 figures sitting beneath the Ingram Oak, close together on that old wooden bench, holding hands and watching the sky turn gold. Whether it is memory or something more, no one can say for certain. But everyone agrees on one thing: it is a fitting sight, because that oak tree was where Kyle and Faye's story began, and in the hearts of all who knew them or heard their tale, it is where their love continues to bloom eternal, as steady and enduring as the ancient tree itself. Their love story became legend in Kennewick, passed down through generations, told and retold until it became part of the town's identity. Young couples would visit the Ingram Oak, hoping some of Kyle and Faye's enduring love might bless their own relationships. The bench became a favored spot for marriage proposals, and the tree was featured on countless wedding invitations from families with ties to the Ingrams. The schoolhouse where Faye taught was eventually replaced by a larger building, and when it was dedicated in 1945, it was named the Faye Ingram School in her honor. A bronze plaque at the entrance told her story: a dedicated teacher who valued education and compassion in equal measure, who gave her time and resources to ensure every child had opportunity, who proved that one person could indeed make a lasting difference. Thomas operated the ranch until his own death in 1956, and it passed to his son, Kyle Thomas Ingram, named after his grandfather. That second Kyle grew up hearing stories of his grandparents' remarkable love, and he took those lessons to heart, marrying his own college sweetheart and raising 5 children on the same land where his grandfather had found redemption under an oak tree. Margaret's legal career flourished even after her mother's death, and she continued practicing law until she was 72, retiring in 1955 as one of the most respected attorneys in Texas. She never forgot the values her parents instilled, taking on numerous pro bono cases for families who could not afford legal representation, ensuring that Kyle and Faye's legacy of service continued in her own way. Daniel remained in Kennewick his entire life, raising cattle on a portion of the family ranch and serving on the town council for 30 years. He was known for his fairness and compassion, traits he had learned watching his parents navigate life with grace and generosity. His children and grandchildren continued that tradition, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation Kyle and Faye had laid. As the decades passed and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the Ingram story remained vibrant and relevant. In 2003, a great-great-granddaughter of Kyle and Faye published a book about their lives, meticulously researched using family letters, journals, and interviews with descendants. The book became a regional bestseller and brought renewed attention to the Ingram oak. The ranch, still in family hands after more than 125 years, opened a small museum in the original ranch house, carefully restored to look as it had during Kyle and Faye's time. Visitors could see their personal belongings, read their letters, and learn about the legacy they created. But the most popular part of any tour was the walk to the Ingram Oak, where the guide would tell the story of a lonely rancher and a trespassing schoolteacher whose love changed an entire community. The oak tree itself, now estimated to be more than 300 years old, was declared a Texas Historic Landmark in 2010. Arborists carefully maintained it, ensuring it would continue to stand for generations to come. The bench beneath it, replaced several times over the years with faithful reproductions of Kyle's original, remained a destination for romantics and history enthusiasts alike. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Kyle and Faye's love story was not found in landmarks or museums, but in the countless lives they touched and the ripple effects of their generosity. The families they helped in their lifetimes went on to help others in turn, creating a culture of community support that became a defining characteristic of Kennewick. The children Faye taught grew up to become teachers, doctors, business owners, and community leaders, many of them citing her influence as pivotal in their lives. The tradition of gathering beneath the Ingram oak continued through the generations. Every year on the anniversary of Kyle and Faye's first meeting in October, the family held a reunion there, sometimes numbering over 100 people, all descended from that lonely rancher and his trespassing schoolteacher. They would share a meal, tell stories, and take turns sitting on the bench, feeling the connection to ancestors who had loved so deeply and lived so well. In 2028, exactly 150 years after Kyle found Faye reading under his tree, the Ingram family hosted a massive celebration. Descendants came from across the country and even overseas, gathering to honor the couple whose love had created such a vast and loving family. A great-great-great-grandson, himself a rancher on a portion of the original property, gave a speech that brought tears to every eye. 150 years ago today, my great-great-great-grandfather was riding across this land, alone and lonely, believing he would spend the rest of his life in isolation. But fate, or God, or simple chance, brought a young woman to this tree, and she sat down to read. What happened next changed not just 2 lives, but hundreds, eventually thousands. Because Kyle and Faye did not just fall in love. They built a partnership based on generosity, compassion, and service. They taught their children those values, who taught their children who taught us. Every good thing we do, every kindness we show, every time we choose love over fear and generosity over selfishness, we honor them. They gave us more than life. They gave us a blueprint for how to live well. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in the brilliant colors Kyle and Faye had watched together for over 50 years, the assembled family stood in a circle around the oak tree and held hands. They sang hymns that Kyle and Faye had loved, said prayers for those who had passed and blessings for those yet to come, and took a moment of silence to remember where it all began. The Ingram oak stood strong above them, its branches spread wide in what seemed like an embrace, sheltering the family that had grown from 2 lonely people who had been brave enough to open their hearts. The tree that had witnessed that first meeting and countless thousands of moments since stood as a living monument to the truth that love, real and lasting love, changes everything it touches. And so the story of Kyle Ingram and Faye Ellsworth continues, passed down through generations, inspiring new love stories and acts of kindness, proving that one chance meeting under an old oak tree can create ripples that extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. Their love made a lonely ranch complete, but more than that, it made countless lives richer, brighter, and more full of hope. Theirs was a simple story in many ways. A man and a woman who found each other, fell in love, built a life, and served their community. But in its simplicity lay profound truth. Love does not need grand gestures or dramatic declarations to be transformative. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin quietly, with a woman reading under a tree and a man kind enough to let her stay. Sometimes the most enduring legacies are built one small act of generosity at a time. And sometimes, a place as simple as an oak tree on a Texas ranch can become holy ground, made sacred not by grand events, but by the steady, faithful love of 2 people who understood what truly matters. That understanding, that commitment to love and service, that choice to build something meaningful together, became Kyle and Faye's gift to the world. And beneath the spreading branches of the Ingram oak, that gift continues to be given, received, and passed on, exactly as they would have wanted, forever and always.